All right, welcome back to the channel. I am Jonathan, and this is my YouTube channel. Today we're going to keep working on our Cannon Empire soldier. See what else we can do to make him look strong and ready to defend the Empire. Feel like we've layered in good bits already, but there's plenty of room for more. And I'm going to try and do this without knocking into the camera stand too often. So I'm going to go ahead, first thing out of the gate, and invite you, if you have not already, to like and subscribe and do all of the things you do for a YouTube channel if you like the content they're making. I would very much appreciate that kind of support as I try and get this working to a point where we can all enjoy my artwork and the opportunity for you all to both learn philosophies I have about making artwork, because that does play into, I believe, a discussion about art. And at the same time, we'll also get the opportunity to tailor the content a little bit more specifically to this world that I've built and have been kind of describing and bouncing between telling you about the historic inspirations I have for decisions I've made about how life is functioning at the moment for my world, as well as just trying to give everybody some ideas about how to go about doing fantasy. And, you know, I look around, and at this point, unlike when, say, Tolkien was doing his thing with The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, a lot of people have shown up to the space, and they have had opinions about how fantasy should be written and what it should be written about, and what are we trying to say with it. You know, because I don't think it will shock anybody to realize that, you know, things that George R.R. Martin thinks about fantasy are not the same things that Tolkien thought about fantasy, much less, you know, to go to a younger audience, you know, what J.K. Rowling thinks of a fantasy world. Or I guess in her case, it's a little bit more adding fantasy to our world, but even that is a decision to be made about how you engage your treatment of a world. And some of those decisions that I've encountered in books I've read have been formative and informative as far as giving me ideas about how you can express yourself and beliefs that you have about fantasy. You know, I think one of the biggest things that I got from the various authors that I've read over the years is just simply the realization that everybody brings their own biases to the things that they write, you know. Tolkien was writing something that for many of us resonates, because he's dealing with looking at a world post, like, as he's integrating the lessons he learned in World War One, and also integrating his studies in Norse mythology and languages. He starts seeing that there are certain things that he wants in the world that he started in the trenches. And because being in the trenches was such a formative part of his late youth, early adulthood, you see themes coming up where he's attempting to put together what he saw in the trenches with his beliefs as a Catholic, with his understanding of the world, and come out with something that other people can engage in. Again, there's, depending on who you ask and like what they're after, like, he kind of has some poignant notions about people who've been through vastly traumatic experiences. He lets Frodo and Bilbo go off into the east, or into the west. I remember my directions on this stuff, I promise. It kind of gives them permission to step away from what we would consider for them to be the real world. To have the opportunity to check out from the continued struggles that their adventures have brought. But you'll also notice he kind of waits until they're later in life. And I've heard some people talking about, he says some things about what we probably would go ahead and call the self-harming permanent nap type stuff, so that I don't have to worry about things on this platform. But I think some people want to read in that he's more okay with that than I think he really was. In part because I know he was a relatively faithful Catholic, and giving yourself the permanent sleep is not something that Catholicism has ever stood easy with. I think it is notable that the characters that are given the chance to leave the world early are in fact the ones who spent the most time in the company of the evil that faced the world. I feel like that's him saying, there are some of us who are stuck in closer. We've given everything we have to the fight, and now in our old age, it's time for us to curl up by the fire and let the next generation take up the fight against evil. And you go, well, what do you mean? He, with the end of the ring came the end of, evil on the world. And all you have to do is read some of the appendices to find out that no, the world continues to have struggles after the events in the main part of the story of Return of the King. There are still dangerous parts of the world. There are still evil men who decide to do things that harm others. Aragorn's rule is not just automatically, hey, everybody's getting along together. Life happens. But I think it's interesting that he gives that the characters that gave the most in direct conflict a chance to go, you know what, we've done our thing. Nothing is tying us into what's happening in this world now. We're gonna go. And he does give permission for, like, if you want to think of it that way, I think it's him saying, hey, some of us have seen some evil stuff, and as new evils rise, it's not necessarily the place of the old guard to always be the powers that step in to right the wrong. You know, it's a costly venture being the one who is, if you will, the tip of the spear as we engage with and fight with new rounds of evil. And I do think that there's definitely a place to sit there and go, like, no, you if you have done the time, if you have faced the battles before you, there does come a point where you just get to lay it all down. And again, it's so interesting trying to talk details and symbols in Lord of the Rings, because Tolkien himself tried not to make any of his talking points especially identifiable. Like, the big one that I see as his overall message, which I don't think is hidden or like some sort of clever nod or anything like that, I think his big treatise is, you cannot give up hope because you don't have all the information. Like, why does Denethor try to kill himself and Faramir? Why does he put them on the pyre and try and destroy their lives before the orcs have even really gotten too far into Minas Tirith? Well, because he was looking into the Palantir, and this was one I didn't necessarily know, but in the appendices of the extended versions, the gentleman who is the Tolkien, I believe it's his autobiographer, or it's his biographer, talks about, if you go through and check the dates, the reason that Denethor breaks down the way that he does is because Sauron has just received the shirt of mail and what was the other proof of life, essentially, that they took off of Frodo. But basically, Sauron was able to hold that up in front of the mirror and go, see, this side quest that the wizard tried just completely failed. I'm in control. And, in that sense, with a threat of such an existential level like Sauron presents for Middle Earth, like, I get Denethor losing hope. But again, you run into this interesting notion that he puts into the books of Denethor didn't know everything. But he's trying to act as though he knows what's happening. He knows the future. And, doing so is what ultimately threatens Faramir's life. And I think that is one of the big scenes where Tolkien's trying to reach out and go without thinking his audience is too stupid to follow him, as some writers and entertainers are wont to do these days. He makes the point that Denethor has given up. Like I said, I didn't realize until I was watching the appendices, and he mentioned, like, okay, the dates line up in such a way that, like, what Denethor would have just seen in the Palantir is those proofs that Sauron had captured the ring bearer. But even without knowing that, I could sit there and watch it and go, I don't care if he's got the ultimate weapon. He's still evil. You fight until you can't lift your sword to fight anymore. Which brings up one of my favorite the episodes. I think it's one of the ones that never actually aired on Fox for Firefly. And it's the quote when they receive the corpse of, an old army buddy from back in the days of the Revolution. And he's got his recorder going of the, if you can't run, you walk. If you can't walk, you crawl. If you can't crawl, well, you keep fighting anyways. And I think that is more in line with the message Tolkien is trying to send through The Lord of the Rings. It's, you keep going till it's over, because you cannot possibly know enough about what is happening in the world to make an actually informed decision. So instead of getting worried about, what's so-and-so doing, what's so-and-so doing, you focus on what's actually in your world that you control, and you work with what you got from there. Which does mean we're going to do a bit more of this. This is one place I probably should go find a little bit of reference for a fairly shiny helmet and how it would react in sunlight. But I feel reasonably confident that I can fake my way through enough that we'll all enjoy what comes out at the other side. Here we go. Okay. Sorry, I managed to get something between toes that is hard and uncomfortable, so. This is what I like, bouncing between the hard and the soft pastels. Because the hard is what gives you that nice texture in there, and then get the soft come in and you can kind of blend that out. And while this is putting down more color, it's also blending the texture, and for something that's supposed to be more or less plate, that I think looks a little bit better than if it's overly textured. Yeah, I definitely want to make, this is one place I definitely want the transition from sky to armor to be in evidence. Here. Let's see, what else can we talk about? Oh, continuing projects and things as we move forward, both with the channel and with me trying to make art to sell and hopefully make you all happy and decorate your homes and games and the like. I have mentioned more than a few times that part of my inspiration into the world that I'm doing has been that I play D&D. And so I started throwing together the bare bones of creating some sort of travel guide and adventure book. So I kind of went through and I've been thinking about, like, okay, what places do we already know exist in this world? Who are characters that I think are going, like, will give you touchstone looks into this world that is not part of the regular and organized Forgotten Realms settings or the other D&D major settings, but something that more than likely, at least until I finish this book, you'd only be able to access it at my table playing in my game. And so one of the things, so I have some friends that will probably help me with this, because some of this is going to be creating game mechanics, and one thing that I know of myself is I'm not especially good at that. I'm good at arbitrating random rules that I make up on the spot, but to actually create a system to pass on to somebody else who might want to play in my world, it's not as straightforward, and my brain doesn't really think through the, like, it's actually hard running for these guys because they do play so many games that mechanics that can be easily exploited or are janky, what have you, just it immediately pops off the page to them, which is a good thing, especially if I'm going to be trying to hand off a way for others to come into my world, and I can't be at their table to arbitrate the, well, we found this and you're saying we can do this thing, so does it work like this? And so that'll be good, but I'm still trying to put together, because it is still, although they have played within this world, they have thus far not been part of creating any more than what their characters did. I guess I'll say it that way. And so I'm trying to see if I can't show up to present them a fair bit of, okay, I have a skeleton of an idea for what we're going to make this product be, because ideally if I'm showing up with a product for somebody to play, it needs to be that exactly. It needs to be a product. It needs to be something that they can pick up and take to their D&D table, and without much MacGyvering, be able to put the rules and techniques that I have created as part of how Canalin functions. I'm going to have to go through and ensure that I have found the loopholes, found the ways that people will exploit it. And again, I'm very thankful for this particular group of guys, because they don't set out to do it, but if they think they can, abuse a mechanic in a game to personal advantage, they're gonna try. Because for them, that is actually part of how they have their fun. It's the, oh, you want it to be like this, but the wording you gave leaves enough room for me to say that it could mean this. And now it's, the task of our DM to come along and go, okay, I see why you think it would be that way, but no, it doesn't actually function that way. It actually goes this way, which, to me, your good DMs find a way to go, okay, you can't do the big broken thing that you really, really wanted, because this world has to remain stable. It's not like, I guess the best way I can think to say it right now is I'm not trying to build this product to be something where you're playing in a D&D version of a hardcore Minecraft world, where, like, if you can exploit it enough, the world will cease to function or whatever. I am hoping to put enough details and whatnot in there that people can see the thrust of, okay, this is built to play on the aspects of D&D that allow for heroic nights and devastating losses and really fun stories that like, I still find one of the most interesting things that they've learned about what happens when people play D&D is the events in the game end up being nearly as real to people as things that have happened in their own lives. And I just think that's amazing. Like, if there's anything to suggest our brains are built to run on story, it's the fact that playing a game that, I think ultimately when you boil D&D down, it's storytelling where you allow random chance a hand in the outcome, you know. And by that I mean, if you read Beowulf, the story is the same every time. And there's definitely a place for those. Like, it's not for nothing that it has been a classic that has called to many generations of scholars, of monks, of, you know, lots of people who have encountered that that story. Like, there's certainly a place for that. But I find it interesting that our brains take that story and the stories made up on the fly during a D&D game with basically the same level of buy-in. Like, your brain buys into this fantasy world that you're playing in the same as it does when you pick up Beowulf and you know, read about that. And I just find it very interesting that it's a way to tap into that. So for me, at the end of the day, a tabletop RPG is a facilitator of storytelling. Some of them facilitate something that's more of a simulation. Those are your RPGs that have a bigger focus on doing crunchy things like keeping track of how many shots you've taken, and it's going to take you X amount of time to learn a new language that you've encountered, and, you know, different things like that. And so there are definitely some some tabletop RPGs that are built on making a simulation of reality. You have others that do variations on that. Like, so there are some storytelling ones where it's you really don't use dice at all. They have other mechanisms by which you arbitrate the random things that have to happen in a game. In this case, one that comes to the mind pretty readily is Dread, which uses making essentially a gameplay move in Jenga as the arbiter of whether you've done this very dangerous, difficult thing or not. And it is far more based on okay, what story can you tell with everybody who's there to play? Versus D&D, which has some simulation elements to it. For instance, you can track ammunition usage. I won't say it universally happens, but in many of the games that I have played, especially of 5th edition, which is what I currently would say I've run the most, there are enough rules available in the D&D books to create a quasi-simulator experience. Why do I say it that way? It's 5th edition in particular feels a lot like they looked at all of the things that had come before that had been called D&D and went, we don't want to make anybody who's ever tried playing D&D feel left out of this game. There are insanely powerful, wondrous items for you to find. There are mechanics that are holdovers that are not necessarily intuitive anymore. Where when D&D first came out, it was kind of one of those, like, it was breaking ground on getting away from war game simulations, because that is what I've been told. I don't have any personal experience myself with the game Chainmail, but a number of places that I have encountered that talk about D&D history, it's one of the things that seems to have had some of the most direct influence on how D&D was invented and came to be. But again, that was pretty clearly more of a war game situation. So you're not dealing with, and here's where I would say you can draw your difference if you're not sure what an RPG versus, say, a war game would be. As the hobby has expanded, I would say that RPGs have become the place where you tell a story about an individual. So this is where we get characters like Tanis Half-Elven in Dragonlance, Drizzt Do'Urden in Icewind Dale trilogy. Trying to think, because I haven't read it. Like, there's the characters from the Ed Greenwood novels, that kind of thing. Those are all basically, they are RPG characters. Now they live in this weird world where they themselves are functioning, active people within the realm of, within the bounds of this setting. They have their own goals, their own missions, their own loves. They're able to do their own things, but the novels that they're in are set in an RPG setting. So there's only so much that their actions have influence on the world. And I was kind of talking about this last time I got drawing, of like, at a certain point, because Bob Salvatore is on staff for Wizards of the Coast, and he created Drizzt Do'Urden as a character for them, he lost some of the capacity to let that story evolve as the characters drove it. Because he has to, because again, I mentioned, like, he's got to mention when the big thrust for D&D is, hey, we're gonna have the Red Priests of Thay have some huge uprising, whatever, that's going to reach out and influence the Forgotten Realms on so many different levels, and that it's like, okay, well, now whatever, he has to pay attention to what gets said about the areas that he's putting his characters into in the official releases about, this big Red Priests of Thay arc that is happening to the whole world. Even though there's really nothing in Drizzt's story that connects him directly to it aside from his existence in the Forgotten Realms. And that's just where I see a lot of the struggle between art and product come out in the things that Salvatore does with his characters. It's that unique tension. And some people like him can do it well enough that like I thoroughly enjoyed the first few trilogies that he wrote about Dristorn. Never wanted to play him, but I don't like playing Rangers, and dual wielding to me always comes off as it's flashy, it's cool, but it's not. You set yourself too many disadvantages relative to the advantages that you get. Part of the reason why I feel like Bob has to go in and be like, okay, and now he has magic scimitars and a way to move insanely fast. As the stories go on and he's able to put more dangerous foes and situations in front of that group of characters, you've got to keep pushing that envelope of what they're capable of doing, and some of it just for me starts ending up feeling like, okay, you're so invested in how this is supposed to be that like you literally had to make them give you wondrous items for your characters that either a dungeon master is going to have to come along and stat after the fact when their party encounters this character and almost inevitably decides they've got cool stuff we want. Now a good DM makes there be significant consequences for killing off one of the champions of the Forgotten Realms. But again, as I think it's Matt Colville did an excellent job pointing out in one of the videos, like the moment that D&D released the pamphlet, or I'm trying to think what it actually was. I forget if it was a magazine or an actual book or whatever, but basically they statted out the gods, which signals to the vast majority of players of, oh, if they have stats, we can end them. And that has led to its own brand of, like, the notion of god killing has been around for a long time. In several ways, it permeates quite a bit of what happens for, say, Critical Role. And again, I would be curious if Matt Mercer could even break down how much of putting stats to somebody like Vecna or Ioun or whatever gods he's chosen in this particular game. I'm curious to know if he knows why he has so much of the that was kind of silly. Which is one of the things that you do need to worry about if you decide to pick up Chalk Pastel. Really, I should probably have a dust mask on while I'm working, because it is loose particulate, and because I'm also using artist grade materials, some of the pigments that are available are not the best to get yourself ingesting. So this is a case where, for the moment, I'm going to say, do as I say, not as I do. And again, there's a certain amount of outcry anytime anybody does something that has risk involved with it. So anybody does anything online, you've got the people who show up immediately to be like, you're not safe enough while you're doing this. And if I spent 10 hours a day doing this, I absolutely would ensure that I had some sort of protection from all of the dust. The same way when I'm sanding for a long time with rock or, what have you, I do take the precaution of covering my face. Because I do have a wife and son that I want to be here for and not have things like silicosis and other lung ailments to cause problems with me being able to take care of my friends and family. So let's see, what was I going on about before I got distracted by a cloud of dust? Yeah, but just kind of going back to that notion of like, it is a very interesting space to be in design. Even in my case of just contemplating building something to put out into the world for Canolin, so that other people can come along and play with the world, have fun with it, tell stories together, make memories that are memories that I never would have imagined, because that's not how I think about RPGs, like, in that sense, it is just such a cool hobby, because even when you give people the same sets of challenges, they all respond differently to what's going on. My favorite part of this, like my favorite demonstration of just how differently people will react given the same set of basically the same problem setup, was one of the times that I was running one of the adventures that I do for lower level players. I basically ran it within a week of each other for one group that was mostly inexperienced players and one group of very experienced players. And the approach that both parties took to this little gimmick in the dungeon was so much fun to watch. So if you've read Tales of the Yawning Portal, it's one of the challenges in the Sunless Citadel. But basically your group comes into this room and there's a few bits of broken glass, and there's this strange orb that seems to be kind of have these clouds orbiting inside of it, but it doesn't really seem like it's not. I think it glows a little bit, but it's not like, hey, I'm a super magical item. And in fact, if one of the characters attempts to ascertain how magical it is not very magical whatsoever. And yet, what it does is, if a character approaches and picks it up, they have to make a save. If they fail the save, it starts making an extremely loud noise. And if they fail their save, it also makes them run away from it. And then looking at some of the other bits, it's basically meant to have them run away, run out the front door to get as far from it as they can, which will hopefully make them forget about the fact that there is a trap right outside the front door. And so theoretically fall into that, essentially get forced into a pit trap that should have been exceptionally easy to avoid. And here again, you have these two parties. One of them wants to... The experienced players basically wanted to try figuring out how to pick it up. And I think they ended up succeeding. But they also succeeded on the save, so even though they were picking things up and it was screaming and making noise, it had not managed to push any of them out into danger. By the same token, the inexperienced team went in. They had, I think it was 2 of the players failed to save when the noise started, so they got forced to run outside. One of them did end up falling in the pit, the other one didn't. But then to deal with it, instead of attempting to pick it up or do anything like that, once it was realized, like, hey, this is affecting team members, one of my brand new players literally took his sword and smashed the globe, which ends all of the stuff that it has going on. And so it was very interesting to watch these 2 interactions, like I said, less than a week apart. Having 2 teams that were so different in makeup and thinking about how to play a game. Because the one thing is the new players, I feel like, treated it like, okay, this is our first experience. We don't know that, if you will, we have infinite res. We're trying to keep these characters we created because we created them because we like them. Or at least we feel like this is a character that's going to be able to show up in this world and be effective one way or another because we've had somebody come in and tell us, like, hey, let's do this. And in the meantime, the other group was like, well, we know about the fact that we can just keep making it. And so while each of them was playing the game as a game, what it allowed them to think of attempting was very different sets of outcomes. And I just, like I said, I love that dynamic of you can run the same scenario for different groups and you will always get a different result because everybody thinks about what they're doing in a very different way. And I love that D&D gives that kind of freedom of expression that you don't get from, if you play Monopoly, there are some silly side questy type things that you can do. There are ways to play the game that is less efficient, but ultimately you're only going to win Monopoly if you can get enough hotels on enough pieces of property that people are landing on that you can bankrupt them. There's just really no other way to play Monopoly. Like I said, there are different strategies, there are different things that you can do, but ultimately that is the game of Monopoly. Whereas D&D is, here's a complex problem, or even a relatively simple problem. But everybody gets to bring their own experiences to the game and figure out what they want those, how that informs what they're willing to do You know, because I can tell you the biggest difference between the two group, the experienced group was going, aha, we probably can sell this for money. Where the new player was going, wait, this thing made my friends run away. That's not good. I need my friends to get through this dungeon. I will just break the thing that is making them, not be useful. And those are both completely valid answers to the test of here's an object that is capable of driving you and your party to do things that you wouldn't necessarily want to do. And they're both valid outcomes. And that's just, like I said, it's so much fun. And then you have, the other people that are sitting there going like, well, we've played with a bunch of people like, my experienced group, and they've seen it all. So what can I do to make things, worse for them? And that's where you get things like the infinitely resetting trap, which is really just a test of patience for your group. Because you basically you manage to separate most of the group like into two by having a door closed behind part of them, and then you hear the ominous voice coming over the speakers going 10, 9, 8, and keeps counting down, and there is a big obvious button in the center of this room. Well, people being people, if there's a button, push the button. The voice resets. And basically the only way to get the voice to stop counting down is to let it finish counting down, and as soon as it does, it unlocks the door. And again, there are some gamers that look at that and go like, okay, that is just so irritating. You're not letting me do a thing to bypass this. I'm like, yeah, exactly. You're so worried about beating my game rather than playing an RPG that the simple notion of having a door that with no instructions, all you have to do is just wait it out. It's infuriating you that I have a mechanic like that in the system. You're pissed that I have placed somebody intelligent enough in this world to go, people really like pushing buttons, so we'll let them. And they can push this button as hard, as long, as much as they like. And the only thing that's going to happen while they do is they reset the countdown. And again, I get there are certain circumstances where that is utterly infuriating to be on the receiving end. And yet I think it also shows the kind of player you're working with if they get upset by it. I can understand being frustrated in the midst of, we push the button, the timer resets, but there doesn't seem to be anything else that we can do. And until one of them gets smart enough to go, I just sit there and let it run down. I stop any of the other players who approach it and just go like, well, let's just be ready for anything. I want to reward that player for thinking of being patient like that. And that trap is definitely a way to do so. And again, some of that is I think there are, especially among more experienced players, they get into habits of, we confront everything put in front of us one way and one way only, because we're so used to playing the game this way that that's just what happens. My experienced group that I get to play with, you hand them an empty room with a door, and it's going to take them 30 minutes to get out of it, not because they're failing rolls, although that occasionally also happens, but they're trying to figure out how I'm trying to screw them. They're trying to sit there and be like, okay, so is the door a mimic? Is there a trap on the door? What's going on? I'm completely thrown off by the presence of a door. Doors can't possibly be just doors ever. And again, it comes from having experience playing tabletop RPGs for the better part of 20 years at this point for some of them. That, it's like, we have seen the dwarves are mimics. We have seen all of these, crazy things that people have done to us that now make us go, we can't make normal decisions anymore. And, again, it's okay, I can understand how you got to that point, but you also have to put in mind, if you're going to metagame by the I've been screwed in situations like this before, you also have to metagame like, I'm not a particularly adversarial DM. Like, I'm not out to have beef with my players, much less their characters. Like, I'm here to tell a story. I'm going to present you with problems. I want to see how you, as your character, decide to use the resources you've got to deal with the problem. It's why with one of the with my experienced team, one of the things in one of the dungeons was, you literally can't beat the Elder Blue Dragon. You guys are like 5th level, and even though there's 6 of you, like, it's just tanking so many hits. Like, if we really want to sit there and draw this out, like, we're going to be at this fight for a couple of sessions, because that group, we only meet a few hours every week, most weeks. Like, so if you think I'm giving you something that we're just going to slog through that long, you're probably wrong. So look around the room again. See what else is going on. I've probably given something else that could happen. If I haven't, that is either bad design on my part as a DM, or there is something in the story that is supposed to be happening, and you guys are just finding those, if you will, you're just getting into the leading edge of it. And so now, you're... I don't want to say I force you through the cutscene, but it's more that than anything else that I can think to describe what I'm attempting to do in those moments. And I'm sure sometimes with my players it also doesn't help that I like talking about people who can... Like, I love when I hear somebody turn a trope on its head. Like, the notion of walking into a room and the door slamming shut behind you, has been in gaming in so many different ways. Like, that's half of Legend of Zelda. You go into an area, and until you solve the puzzle in that area, you're now stuck here until till you can complete task, you are in this area. You know, or you die and you get to play again until you win. That's how Zelda works. So somebody who can come along and upend that trope by going, oh yes, this is definitely a place in this dungeon where a door comes crashing down, it splits the party. If they're properly cautious enough, it'll split it where it's like there's maybe 2 people inside the room, and then the rest of the party is now suddenly outside the room and can't really see. Like, they're trying to problem solve through the door, but they can't actually see what's in there. Especially if they weren't paying close attention when the door was open and they could see in there. If they were too busy doing other things and all that, it's like, well, they tell you there's this, and this. You know, and what did I see if well, you were not looking at that point in time, so you hear them tell you they see this, and this. And that can be frustrating for people, and I totally get that, because I've been there going like, okay, I'd like some more information, and the DM just sits there and smiles. That's nice. Because it does feel kind of frustrating when you're like, okay, we're trying all of the things that we know to attempt to maybe find, a place to take actions at. And you're giving us nothing. And a good player will eventually go, we're getting nothing because there's nothing else to get. We have the maximum amount of information about the situation, so we just have to start figuring out what we're actually going to do from here and live with the consequences thereof. And some players are better at that than others. Doesn't necessarily make them better players. It just makes them... I feel like the players who can do that are more likely to continue having a fun time, even when they do feel like they've been stymied by situations. Whereas the people who always feel like they have to have the answer for all of the things, they have to be able to understand why this or that happened. If they don't feel like they've had the situation properly explained, they're upset because they feel like they're getting cheated out of something they think perhaps their character ought to know, even if it's something that they themselves don't. And for certain things, I'm more than okay with going, hey, you've been telling me you're putting in time studying this thing. All right, well, that means that now that you're engaged with this, you don't know what's happening, but that's because, and you realize it is because the circumstances you find yourself in are nothing like the circumstances you were reading about, let's say, people interacting with this substance with before, You've never heard, which in and of itself is an interesting bit of information. If you're encountering, say, a magical crystal that's doing something that all of your study says it should just be, say, randomness, and now it's doing its thing, the fact that it's not doing the stereotypical, like, what it has traditionally been used for is in itself some very interesting information, because unless you're running a very, very loose magic system, magical things should behave the same way no matter how they're doing things. If they're not, that means that somehow or other they can be manipulated in ways that people haven't discovered yet. Or only certain people have discovered, and perhaps now, in this abandoned dwarven facility, that was all about these crystals. Like, they figured out how to do really, really strong, powerful, amazing things with it. But because they were kind of playing with things that they didn't understand at the time, now you're seeing that you and your team are showing up to the aftermath of them losing control of all of this stuff. Well, okay, so how does that add into what you're seeing? Like, are you now encountering something that this, like, now you get to figure out, okay, is what we're seeing here the result of what happens every time this substance, let's say magical crystal, are we now seeing, if you can apply the right things to it, what it's doing here that is so out of character is actually a pretty easy, natural progression for it under the circumstances that we're now finding this thing. Or is it something where the people who were experimenting here managed to do something that is apparently possible, but ultimately insanely dangerous, at least to your own person, perhaps to the world at large? That I think is the area where the DM gets to decide how consequential it is that your characters are now experiencing a thing that is, for all intents and purposes, brand new. Excuse me. I'm still trying to figure out if I'm actually dealing with a cold that my son might have brought home, or I'm just pathetically weak and, my brain is doing its own thing trying to kill me. I don't know. We'll keep going. I feel terrible, because I should definitely do this hand better than I have. But I haven't done hand studies in a long while, and now we all have to suffer because of my choice of not studying well. I do hope it makes sense. I just think I have a few of the angles off, particularly because of the fact that it's such a foreshortened set of shapes. which, you know, foreshortening in and of itself is just a good way of being able to push the drama of an image. You know, again, he'd look much different if I didn't have him trying to advance with his shield the way that he's advancing with his shield. So I'm trying not to over-dramatize the shadow effects, but doesn't mean there aren't any shadowed places on him. These are the kinds of things that I want to get into more. Find better ways of reaching out to you as an audience to teach more of what I know about drawing and painting and generally making visual art. On the one hand, I don't want to get caught up in I want to be another, like, Proco TV or something like that. Partly because he's made such a huge impact on being you can come to his little portion of YouTube and find a way to go from there to the rest of his websites and find legitimate instruction. On being a visual artist and how to go about teaching yourself how to do this. I'm not certain I'm entirely sold on the notion of becoming strictly an art educator. But almost inevitably, once you start putting art out there, people want to ask, how do you do it? And so that is something that I'm going to hopefully try and figure out as life goes on, as my subscriber count ticks up. As I can do, say, live streams so somebody can ask a question and get a pretty direct response about a particular problem they may be encountering. You know, I may not have, in fact, I will go ahead and say I probably don't have the answer you want for a lot of those kinds of individualized concerns about pieces that you might be making. Which is not to say that I'm above going, hey, if you're willing to put in X amount of time, you know, if you're willing to pay for my time to sit there and give you critique of what you're accomplishing, I'm more than happy to take money to help as best I can indicate places where you have room to grow. You know, but I'd also love to be able to set that up in a way that, you know, somebody may be super dedicated and they're going to show up and they're going to have a whole bunch of stuff, and I will eventually have taught them what I know, and they're going to have to go off and find another teacher to push them beyond what I've already given them. Because that's really what I think, especially in art, ends up pushing you places. It's you reach a point where you've studied someone so much that even when you look at something done in their style, and you can point out hey, these are the problems that they have, you can't. I think there comes a point where you go, like, knowing these things and being able to say them doesn't do anything to enhance my understanding of making artwork. And when you reach a point like that, that is the time I think it is okay, let's go see if we can find a new mentor, teacher, artist style, to invest time and effort with. Because it turns out I really do need to learn how to do that thing. Like, one of the things I really ought to do is see which of the museums here around Denver have a good armor set, and honestly go in, and even if I have to end up figuring out a way to get my own chair or something, go in, sit in the armor section, and just draw. Absorb as much of it as I can through observation. Because the more you study a thing, and especially if you are capable of doing it in person, the better you're going to find yourself capable of answering the question of, why did you put this here? What is the point of this? Like, I got to figure out, like, okay, we've got these lobster pieces for shoulder straps, and we've all seen, I have seen a great deal of shows and whatnot that have Roman legionnaires and equipment to give me kind of a rough notion of, they move sort of like this. I have these a little bit too close together, I think, though part of that is not necessarily wrong, because you probably have a pretty tight layer as you're lifting that arm to hold your shield in place, where back here, as you're getting ready with a sword to be able to swing on people, you're just going to set yourself up differently. The armor is going to be still covering you, but it's going to do so in a very different kind of way than what you see from basically a limb that is locked in place, which is what a shield arm ends up being, in this sort of practical way of, he's standing behind that, bracing himself so that he can take the shield and block blows, and then hopefully find a moment or two where he can take that shield, move his opponent's weapons out of line with stabbing him in the chest or other vital areas, but be able to respond by thrusting with his own sword. And it's just kind of an interesting dance, but that's where, like I said, I'm not as well versed as I should be, I think, on doing some of the things that armor would actually be doing in these circumstances. And that's on me. That's a study failure that I need to go back and address. Which one is this one? This one's just the gray. And that's okay. It's a learning process. And in, say, maybe 5 years, I'll come back to doing something a lot like this. And if I have been smart and put in time studying armor between now and then, I should have something that looks far more capable and realistic than what I'm able to achieve now, where I'm kind of just winging it based off of, you know, a few decent movies I've seen, and that kind of thing. Let's knock you down just a little bit more. Don't want it all gone, but this is too much. I'll come back with more definitive break. And that is another fun process to work with, of trying not to get too linear in differentiating planes. But at the same time, there are certain things that you've got to make it clear that this is not the same thing as that. I think we're going to do some of this down. All right. I think for the sake of the length of video and my own sanity, I think I'm going to say I'm done for today. I think I've got another little bit. I got to do something a little bit more definitive here in the fields that he's romping across, and figure out how to do a little bit more with this smoky area above his head. So there's definitely work left to be done. With any luck, I will record it, and so we'll be able to share my thought processes as I'm going through it. If I feel like it's significant enough of a thing, I may do it on my own, and I will just show you the results after the fact. But I think I'm going to call it there for today. Once again, my name is Jonathan. You've been watching me make chalk pastel art today. So I hope with all of this I've earned a subscription. And yeah, if you could just do all of the things that help the algorithm go, hey, this is somebody you'd like to see more of, I would be eternally grateful. Thank you very much.